Hey everybody, welcome to the channel, and welcome back to part 3 of What If Deku had Carnage. And last we left off, Deku was in the League of Villains base, and they wanted him to join the League of Villains, so let's get back to it. Deku's just sitting there in the bar with Mina still wrapped up in some tentacles, as some of the other tentacles are just waving around in the air, just shooting everywhere, trying to warn the other two in the bar to screw off. As Deku starts walking towards the door, and before he can get there, Shigaraki runs over, tries to touch Deku, but when the tentacles come out of his back, a big one, grabbing onto Shigaraki's arm and breaking 2 fingers on it, and ripping him off, as a little head would form on his back and eat the fingers, and just go back into his head. Deku would say, "Now Carnage, why'd you do that?" As Carnage would pop out of him and say, "Well, he was gonna kill us, so what do you think? I got hungry as well. I wanted a little snack, and since he won't let me eat the girl, looks like I'm gonna have to chew on whatever I can find." As he turns around and sees Shigaraki holding his hand in pain, his blood just squirting out of his hand. Deku says, "Whatever, come on. We're taking the girl and we're going to somewhere else. Sorry, League of whatever the hell you want to be called. Yeah, no, I'm going somewhere else, and I do things alone, but I took an interest in this girl. So, yeah, no, bye." As Deku just goes out of the building as two tentacles of Carnage just shoot out on the buildings, and he just goes across everywhere. He finds a little patch of a park, where in the park is connected to a giant forest. And in the forest is an abandoned wooden cabin, which Deku decides to refurnish, fix up, and make it livable for him. So he connects a water system, sewage system, and a way to find food all around the cabin. And he lives there. Mina's still knocked out as she's just laying on the bed. As she wakes up and she sees this kid on a couch, she's covered up in bandage, because in the last part she was beaten pretty bad and she was left in an alleyway. So Deku would walk over to her and ask if she's alright. Mina would say, "Yes, I'm alright, thank you." As Deku would say, "It's no problem." She would look around and see that whole house, as she would see a bookshelf full of these, what looked to be journals. As she would walk over and she would pick one out and she would just read through it. And it would have a bunch of heroes and their quirks and their weaknesses in it. She would ask, "So what's this supposed to be?" Deku looks over at her and says, "Ah, I see you found my collection of all heroes and villains quirks, I see." Mina says, "Yeah, don't know why you have these, but it's good to know." And she puts the book back and she pulls out another one and it has her in it. She's like, "So wait, you even have quirks from my generation of quirks too?" Deku laughs and says, "Yeah, I took note on everything. And the most important one," as the book just comes out of like a piece of carnage and just hands it to him, says, "This one is about me." And it's a thick one too. If you've ever looked at a dictionary, take about a quarter of the dictionary and slab that pretty much into a notebook, and that's exactly how big it is, full of information from all symbiotes and Carnage, and their weaknesses, strengths, and how to kill them, and how to make them stronger. She would ask if she can read it. Deku would say, "Yeah, but you're gonna have to die after." And Carnage's head pops out and says, "Ooh, so I can eat her then?" Deku punches the little Carnage head and says, "Yeah, no. Do you want me to set you on fire again?" Carnage says, "God, no," and goes back into his body. Deku says, "Sorry about him. This little book here has all information about what that parasite was." Carnage pops out of his head and says, "Parasite? You really just call me Parasite?" Deku says, I'm getting the matches. Carnage just goes back into his body. And Mina asks, so he's a symbiote? Deku goes, correct. And this little book right here has everything about them. Everything, I mean. As the book just goes back into Deku's body. And Deku says, now, you may be asking where you're at. Well, we're in the middle of the forest near a park. The reason why we're here is because, well, I'm on the run, you see. And since you probably don't want to go back to your family, and you don't really want to go back to the public, we're going to stay here for a while. In doing so, he puts his hands on his side and says, we're going to help you train your quirk. She says, we? As Carnage pops out and says, yes, we. As Deku says, don't you dare do it. And Carnage goes, we are Carnage. Or Carnage goes, we are Carnage. Deku's face palms and says, God damn it, Carnage. You just had to say that. Carnage goes back in his body. Deku says, yeah, well, what he said. We're going to be training your quirk. Since a symbiote is already at its full strength whenever it goes into its host, all it really needs to do to survive is just have a host and have a perfect bond with it. And since I'm that perfect bond, he doesn't really need to do anything else. All I need to do is just go along for the ride. Carnage does everything else for me. She says, very cool, I gotta admit. Nick says, yeah, now, if you don't mind, I set up a little training ground for you outside. As he says, follow me, I'll show you where it's at. They walk outside, and it's just metal sheets turned into targets, as well as wood and other targets as well. She would say, so these are the targets, and Deku says, yeah. We're going to learn how to turn your hands into a nozzle to spray your acid at a very high pressure and with such lethality that it can go through even this. As a giant, heavy block of tungsten is brought around the corner and says, this is tungsten, the strongest metal in the world. And in the universe, in fact, says Carnage, as Deku says, shut up, I'm talking. Now, this is the strongest metal in the universe, apparently. And you're going to turn your acid into something so strong that it can melt a hole right through it. She goes, you really think I can do that? Deku says, of course. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to teach you how to fight. So that if you ever do get into a part where you can't use your quirk, you're going to be able to use martial arts and combat skills. She would pretty much get a sparkle in her eyes, and she would say thank you as she went up and hugged Deku. Deku, getting a little red, would say, yeah, no problem, just back up a little bit, you're a little too close. Mina gets a little red and says sorry, as she just backs up. Deku says it's fine, as he crosses his arm and says, now that, since you need to train your quirk a little bit, I'm gonna let you go ahead and just go at the training dummy over here, as he points to the right, away from the acid range, as there's just a metal target, the same metal as tungsten, sitting there as a little dummy figure. And he says, now, I want you to practice your acid levels on this dummy, starting from the lowest, going to the highest. And after that, we're going to try and train it to go higher. She says, okay, starting from the lowest. And she goes from lowest to highest until she gets to battery acid, which is sulfuric acid. She would do so, and it would just leave a little burn mark on it, and then just sizzle. Deku would say that that's a good starting level, but now it's time to take it up a notch. But before we do that, why don't we train your hand-to-hand combat first? As there was a few more training dummies behind it, and the ones behind it are built for hand-to-hand combat, to where if you hit them, it's like pegs on a giant log, to where if you just hit him, it'll spin, and then you can just keep hitting him over and over again. And there's also, on the inside of the log cabin, there's a little basement where there's just some lifting gear, some weights, a boxing ring, and all that. It's not a big boxing ring, it's just more like wires put into a square to where they can just have a little fun, like a little practice boxing match. So Deku would say, alright, first things first, you're going to learn a little bit of fighting styles. So he teaches her some combat skills, and she puts them to the test, which she sucks at first, but after a few months of lifting weights, having practice boxing matches with Deku, and martial art training dummy practices, she gets stronger and stronger. But he doesn't forget about learning. He teaches her, well, Carnage teaches her while he cooks, and he gets most of the housework done as she's getting stronger and better. And time from time, she would be questioned by Carnage about some of the stuff she learned, and she would give correct answers, and if she was wrong, she had to go up against Deku in a boxing match for 5 minutes. But those would usually last longer because they would get into the boxing fight and would see how good they can push themselves, being stopped by Carnage every 10 minutes. So this would go on until one day Deku would clap his hands and say, alright, you remember that test I gave you the first day we started practicing this? She would say, yeah, I remember the acid range and the strength. Deku would say, correct. Now, let's put your acid nozzle test to the test now, shall we? She would say, yes, as they would just walk outside. Deku says, now, do the exact formation that I taught you, collapsing your hands and putting a little hole at the end of your fingertips and forcing your acid through that. She would say, right. As she gets her strongest, or a weak enough acid just to destroy the wood, as she shoots it at the wood, and it just makes a hole right through it, and then just melts it. Deku would clap his hands and say, good. Now, onto the aluminum sheet metal. Same thing would happen. He would say, good, good. Now, the strongest metal in the universe, or in the world, whatever one it is. Now, get your nozzle and shoot your strongest acid at it, and let's see what happens. As she does so, and a tiny, tiny little crater is made in it. Doesn't burn through, doesn't melt any of the tungsten, it just makes a little dent in it. Deku says, good. You know, it's only been about 4 months, and you've already been doing this so well. Mina says, really? I thought it was a year. Deku says, no, it's only been 4 months, and you've gone so far that you can actually put a dent with your quirk into something so strong. Congratulations. As these two high-five each other, Carnage pops out and says, now, time to go back to your learning lessons, and you can make us food, right? Deku sighs and says, yeah, whatever, let's go. As they walk back inside, as Carnage starts grabbing the books from the bookshelf full of the heroes, and this is the hero decks that I was talking about. They first start going over the villains, the villain decks. They go through books 1 through 50. She writes down most of the important stuff as they go on to the heroes. Same thing happens, she writes down most of the important stuff from the hero decks as she commits them to memory. She mainly writes down the quirks, the abilities, and the weakness. The major weakness, not minors, the majors. As she would ask, do you think I can ever learn about your abilities, Carnage? As Carnage would say, well, you're going to have to ask the host over here. He's the only one that lets me bring out the book. If anything else, he won't let me do it. Deku says, that's right. I'm not going to do it until I fully know that no one's going to betray me or none of this information is going to get out. As far as I know, as he points towards the window exactly where something was, he says, that drone over there could be leaking information. As Carnage and Mina look over to the window and they see a tiny little flying drone. As the tendril shoots out of Deku, grabbing onto the drone, pulling it back in. through the house, through the cabin, as Carnage crushes it and grabs the memory disk out of it and just snaps it in half and throws it into the fire pit, or the fireplace. Deku says, "See, if I would have told that information to you now, my secrets would have been exposed." Carnage says, "Yeah, good catch there, partner." Mina says, "Yeah, you have really good senses." Deku says, "Well, yeah, I guess you could say that." Well, go ahead and rush off to bed after you eat, as Deku puts some of the food onto the table, as Carnage pops out his head, as Deku just feeds him just a live squirrel, and he eats it. It just goes back in and says, we have some more training to do tomorrow, and after that, we're putting you to the test." Mina gets happy, and she says, "Who are we going to be fighting?" As Deku gets a big smirk on his face and says, "We're going to go out and find some heroes and villains to see how much you've learned." And that's where I'm going to end it. Hope you guys enjoy, and see you guys in the next video. Peace.